Diego arrived in Millfield on Sunday morning, just as the church bells were ringing across town. Sarah had been awake since dawn, nervous about meeting the man whose story had captured her imagination for nearly a year. She and Elena were waiting at the diner when his battered pickup truck pulled into the parking lot. Through 2 years after Sarah Martinez left Millfield for Chicago, she received an invitation that brought tears to her eyes. The envelope was cream-colored, thick, and elegant, with her new address written in Elena's familiar handwriting. Elena Vasquez and Diego Morales request the honor of your presence at their wedding ceremony. Sarah held the invitation for a long moment, remembering the crooked mailbox and the desperate young man who had stood by the Henderson fence, clutching a faded letter and refusing to give up hope. The wedding was planned for September in Los Angeles, at a small church near the elementary school where Elena now taught 3rd grade. Sarah had to request time off from her job at the Tribune, but she wouldn't have missed it for anything in the world. Life in Chicago had been everything Sarah had hoped for and more challenging than she had expected. Working for a major newspaper meant longer hours, tighter deadlines, and stories that mattered to hundreds of thousands of people instead of a few thousand. She covered city council meetings, investigated local corruption, and wrote feature stories about immigrants building new lives in America, a beat she had specifically requested, thinking often of Diego's journey. She had also fallen in love. Marcus was a photographer at the Tribune, originally from Detroit, with an easy laugh and a talent for finding beauty in unexpected places. Their relationship had developed slowly, built on shared late nights in the newsroom, and long conversations over coffee about the stories that mattered most to them. When Sarah told Marcus about the wedding invitation and the story behind it, he asked if he could come with her to Los Angeles. "I want to meet the people who taught you to take chances," he said. "Besides, it sounds like a love story worth photographing." They flew to Los Angeles on a Friday evening in September, and Sarah felt her heart race as they descended over the sprawling city where Diego had searched for Elena among millions of strangers. Elena met them at the airport, looking radiant and impossibly happy. She was wearing a simple yellow dress and had flowers in her hair, not for the wedding, just because she felt like it, she explained with a laugh. "Sarah," she exclaimed, pulling her into a tight hug. "I can't believe you're really here." "I wouldn't miss it," Sarah replied honestly. "Where's Diego?" "Setting up chairs at the church with his cousins. His whole family flew up from Mexico for the wedding. My parents are here from Fresno. Even Roberto Jr. drove down from Sacramento with his wife and kids." As they drove through the city, Elena chattered excitedly about the wedding plans, about her job teaching children who spoke 3 different languages, about the small apartment she and Diego had found near the beach. "We walk on the sand every evening," Elena said. "Diego says it reminds him that some good things are worth waiting for, because the ocean has been patient for millions of years, and look how beautiful it became." They met Diego at a small Mexican restaurant near the church, where he was having dinner with his extended family. Sarah was struck by how settled and peaceful he looked, surrounded by people who loved him, planning a future with the woman he had searched for so long. He greeted Sarah with the same warm gratitude she remembered from their first meeting, and he charmed Marcus immediately by asking thoughtful questions about photography and storytelling. "Sarah tells me you document love stories," Diego said to Marcus over dinner. "Have you ever photographed a wedding where the couple waited 8 years to find each other again?" "Never," Marcus admitted, "though I'd love to hear about how you two managed to wait so long." Diego and Elena looked at each other and smiled in that wordless communication Sarah had noticed between couples who truly knew each other. "We didn't wait," Elena said finally. "We lived. We grew up, learned who we were as individuals, built careers, made mistakes, figured out what we wanted from life. The waiting wasn't empty time. It was preparation time. I had to become someone worthy of Elena's love," Diego added. "Not just someone who loved her, but someone who could build a life with her, someone who could be a true partner." After dinner, they walked to the church where the wedding would take place the next day. It was small and simple, with white walls and wooden pews that could hold maybe 100 people. The altar was decorated with white roses and baby's breath, and candles flickered in the gathering dusk. "It's perfect," Sarah said, looking around at the peaceful space. "We wanted something simple, Elena explained. After everything we've been through to get here, we didn't need a big celebration. We just needed to make our promises official in front of the people who matter most to us. Diego pulled out his phone and showed them pictures from the rehearsal dinner the night before, his parents looking proud and happy, Elena's family welcoming him with obvious affection, friends from work and school gathered to celebrate. "Look at this one," he said, stopping at a picture of an elderly woman with silver hair and a radiant smile. "Who is that?" Marcus asked. "Mrs. Henderson's sister," Elena explained. "She lives here in Los Angeles." When we told her about our story, about how Mrs. Henderson's house was where Diego first came looking for me, she insisted on attending the wedding. She said Mrs. Henderson would have loved knowing that her house played a part in bringing us together. Sarah stared at the picture, thinking about the circular nature of their story. Mrs. Henderson, who had been like a grandmother to Elena, whose house had been the starting point for Diego's search, was still somehow part of their love story even after her death. The wedding day dawned clear and warm, with the kind of golden California sunshine that made everything look like it belonged in a movie. Sarah helped Elena get ready in a small room at the back of the church, along with Elena's college roommates and her sister-in-law. Elena's wedding dress was simple but elegant, white lace with long sleeves and a flowing skirt that moved beautifully when she walked. She wore her grandmother's pearl earrings and the silver bracelet with the small cross that Diego had mentioned in his very first description of her. "Something borrowed," Elena said, showing Sarah a delicate lace handkerchief. "From Mrs. Henderson's sister. She said Mrs. Henderson would have wanted me to carry something of hers on my wedding day." As the ceremony began, Sarah sat in the third pew with Marcus, watching as Diego's cousins played guitar and sang a traditional Mexican love song. Diego stood at the altar in a simple black suit, his hands clasped in front of him, his face serene and happy. When the music changed and Elena began walking down the aisle, Sarah felt tears prick at her eyes. Elena moved slowly, gracefully, her face glowing with joy as she looked at Diego. Halfway down the aisle, she paused and looked directly at Sarah, mouthing "thank you" with such sincere gratitude that Sarah had to pull out a tissue. The ceremony was conducted in both English and Spanish, with the priest talking about the nature of true love, about patience and faith, and the courage to believe in promises made by young hearts but kept by mature souls. When it came time for vows, Diego and Elena had written their own words. "Elena," Diego said, his voice steady and clear, "8 years ago, I promised I would find you again. Today, I promise that I will spend the rest of my life being worthy of the faith you had in that promise. I promise to love you not just with my heart, but with my actions. I promise to build a life with you that honors both where we came from and where we're going." Elena's voice shook slightly as she spoke her vows. "Diego, you taught me that love is not just a feeling, but a choice we make every day. You chose to look for me when it would have been easier to forget. You chose to believe in us when everyone said you were chasing an impossible dream. Today, I choose you, not just as the boy I loved when I was 15, but as the man you've become, as the partner you've proven yourself to be." When the priest pronounced them husband and wife, the small congregation erupted in cheers and applause. Marcus was quietly taking pictures throughout the ceremony, but Sarah noticed that he had tears in his eyes too. At the reception, held in the church's fellowship hall with mariachi music and Elena's mother's tamales, Sarah found herself at a table with Mrs. Henderson's sister, whose name was Dorothy. "Tell me about your role in this story, dear," Dorothy said with the directness of someone in her 80s who had no patience for small talk. Sarah explained about meeting Diego by the fence, about helping him search through newspaper archives, about the letters they had exchanged. Dorothy listened intently, nodding occasionally. When Sarah finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "My sister would have loved this," Dorothy said finally. "She always believed that her house had some kind of magic around it. She used to say that love grew better in her garden than anywhere else she had ever lived." "Do you really think places can be magical like that?" Sarah asked. Dorothy smiled. "I think some places hold on to the love that happened there. My sister loved that house, loved the people who lived around it, loved the children who played in her garden. When you have that much love in one place for that many years, it leaves an impression." During the dancing, Diego sought out Sarah for a dance, thanking her once again for everything she had done. "You know," he said as they swayed to a slow song, "Elena, and I have been talking about your story too. My story. The story of a young woman who was living carefully, safely, who saw a stranger's love story and decided to take chances of her own. You moved to Chicago, found work you love, found someone to love. That's a pretty remarkable story too." Sarah looked over at Marcus, who was photographing Elena dancing with her father, his face intent and focused as he captured the moment. "I learned from watching you and Elena," Sarah said. "You showed me that some risks are worth taking. And now you're teaching other people the same lesson," Diego pointed out. "The stories you write about immigrants, about people building new lives in a new place. Those stories give people hope, just like you gave me hope." As the evening wound down, Sarah found herself standing outside the church with Elena, looking up at the stars barely visible beyond the city lights. "I have something for you," Elena said, reaching into her purse and pulling out a small wrapped package. Sarah opened it carefully and found a silver picture frame containing a photograph she had never seen before. Diego standing by the Henderson fence on that first day she met him, looking lost and hopeful and determined all at the same time. "When did you take this?" Sarah asked, surprised. "I didn't," Elena said. "Mrs. Johnson took it from her kitchen window when she saw Diego standing there. She thought he looked so sad and romantic that she wanted to capture the moment. She sent it to me after I wrote to her about the wedding." Sarah stared at the photograph, remembering that afternoon when everything had begun, the crooked mailbox, the dusty road, the stranger with brown eyes who wouldn't give up on a promise made when he was 15. "Thank you," Sarah whispered, "for everything. For letting me be part of your story." "Thank you," Elena replied, "for showing us that strangers can become friends, that kindness to one person can change multiple lives, that some stories don't end. They just keep growing and including more people." 5 years later, Sarah received another letter from Elena. This one contained pictures of their first child, a daughter they had named Sophia, and an invitation to visit them in their new house, a small place with a garden where Elena was teaching Sophia to plant marigolds. "We tell her about the lady in Illinois who helped Mama and Papa find each other," Elena wrote. "Someday, when she's older, we'll tell her the whole story about letters and patience and love that lasts." Sarah kept the letter in her jewelry box, next to the silver bracelet with the tiny envelope charm. She and Marcus were planning their own wedding now, a small ceremony in Chicago with both their families present. Sometimes, late at night, Sarah would take out Diego's old letters and read about his faith, his determination, his refusal to give up on love even when it seemed impossible. The letters reminded her that some things, love, hope, the willingness to help a stranger, never went out of style. In Millfield, the marigolds that Elena had planted still bloomed every summer along the fence of what used to be the Henderson place. Mrs. Johnson sent pictures every year, keeping alive the connection between a small town in Illinois and a love story that had circled the globe before finding its way home. The crooked mailbox was long gone, replaced by something sturdy and new. But the magic that Dorothy Henderson had talked about, the magic of a place where love was nurtured and hope was rewarded, lived on in the story of two teenagers who made impossible promises and two adults who had the courage to keep them. And in the kindness of a stranger who believed that love was always worth fighting for, no matter how long the wait or how uncertain the outcome that hugged the window, Sarah watched Diego take a deep breath before getting out of the truck. He looked exactly as she had pictured him from his letters, tall, with kind brown eyes and careful movements that spoke of someone who thought before acting. He wore clean jeans and a white button-down shirt, and he carried a small bouquet of yellow roses. Elena practically bounced out of her chair when she saw him, and their reunion in the parking lot made several other diners stop eating to watch. There was something magical about seeing two people so obviously in love, Sarah thought, even if you didn't know their story. When they came inside, Diego headed straight for Sarah's table. Up close, she could see that he was nervous too, but his smile was genuine and warm. "Sarah," he said, extending his hand, "I am so grateful to finally meet you." "Diego," Sarah replied, shaking his hand firmly. "I'm glad you made it safely." He handed her the yellow roses with a slight bow. "These are to thank you for giving me back my future," he said simply. Sarah felt her cheeks flush. "I didn't do anything that remarkable, really." "You did everything," Diego insisted, sitting down across from her while Elena slid into the booth beside him. "You listened to a stranger's story. You took time from your work to help someone you had no reason to help. You gave me hope when I was ready to give up." Over breakfast, Diego told Sarah about his journey from Mexico, about learning English, about saving money for years to make this trip north. His English was excellent, though still accented, and he chose his words carefully, thoughtfully. "I have been thinking about this moment for months," he said. "Meeting the person who made it possible for Elena and me to find each other. I wanted to understand what kind of person does such a thing for a stranger. And what kind of person am I?" Sarah asked, genuinely curious about his assessment. Diego studied her face for a moment. "Kind, obviously. But more than that. You have faith in love, even when it seems impossible. You believe people should fight for what matters most to them." "I'm not sure I believed that before I met you," Sarah admitted. "Your story taught me something about taking chances." After breakfast, they drove to the Henderson place, now bright with spring flowers and fresh paint. Diego stood at the fence for a long time, just as Sarah remembered from their first meeting nearly a year earlier. But this time, his expression was peaceful rather than desperate. "This is where it started," he said quietly. "My search for Elena, but also my understanding of what love really means." "What do you mean?" Sarah asked. "When I was young, I thought love was about feelings, about excitement and passion," Diego explained. "But looking for Elena taught me that love is also about faith, about choosing to believe in someone even when you can't see them or talk to them. Love is about becoming the kind of person worthy of the promises you made." Elena took his hand. "You were already worthy," she said softly. "No," Diego shook his head. "I was just a boy with big feelings and bigger dreams. I had to grow up, learn responsibility, learn how to work hard, and save money and plan for the future. I had to become someone who could actually take care of the woman I loved, not just someone who loved her." They walked through downtown Millfield, with Diego asking questions about everything: the history of buildings, the local businesses, the way life worked in a small town. He was particularly interested in the newspaper office where Sarah worked. "This is where you found the information about Elena's family," he said, standing in front of the modest brick building. "This is where our story really changed. Would you like to see the archives?" Sarah offered. "I can show you exactly where we found the mention of the move to California." Diego's face lit up. "Yes, please. I would like to see that very much." The three of them spent the afternoon in the newspaper archives, with Sarah showing Diego the exact files they had searched, the specific article that had mentioned the Vasquez family's move to Fresno. Diego held the microfilm reader like it contained precious treasure. Such a small thing, he marveled. One paragraph in a small-town newspaper. But it changed everything. "Information wants to be found," Sarah said. "Sometimes it just takes the right person looking in the right place at the right time. Or the right person caring enough to look," Elena added, smiling at Sarah. That evening, they had dinner at Sarah's apartment. She had spent hours cooking, wanting to make something special for Diego's first meal in the town he had searched so hard to reach. They ate by candlelight and talked late into the night about their dreams, their plans, their hopes for the future. "What will you do now?" Sarah asked. "Will you stay in Los Angeles?" "For now," Diego said. "Elena has a teaching job lined up at an elementary school there. I'm finishing my certification to be a full-time translator. But, eventually, we want to travel, to see more of this country. And, someday," Elena added, "we want to start a family. We want to have children who grow up knowing that love is worth waiting for, worth fighting for. We also want to help other people," Diego said. "People who are separated by distance or circumstances or immigration issues. We know what it feels like to be apart from someone you love." As the evening wound down, Diego pulled out a manila envelope that he had been carrying all day. "I brought something to show you," he said to Sarah. "Something I think you should see." He opened the envelope and pulled out a thick stack of papers, dozens of letters in different handwritings. "What are these?" Sarah asked. "Letters I never sent," Diego replied. "For 8 years, I wrote letters to Elena every week, even though I had no address to send them to. I wrote about my life, my work, my feelings, my hopes. I told her about learning English, about coming to America, about never giving up on finding her. He handed the stack to Sarah, who looked through them with amazement. Letter after letter, dated carefully, addressed to Elena Vasquez, somewhere in California. Some were long, some were short, but all of them were written in Diego's careful handwriting. "This is incredible," Sarah breathed. "You wrote to her for 8 years without knowing if she would ever read them?" "Writing the letters kept her alive in my heart," Diego explained. "They reminded me why I was working so hard, why I was learning English, why I was saving every dollar to come north." Elena was looking at the letters with tears in her eyes. "I can't believe you did this," she whispered. "I want to give them all to you now," Diego said to Elena. 8 years of my thoughts, my feelings, my love for you. Everything I couldn't say because I didn't know where you were." Sarah watched Elena carefully stack the letters, handling them like they were made of gold. "It will take me months to read all of these," Elena said. "We have time now," Diego replied. "All the time in the world." Later that night, after Diego and Elena had gone back to their hotel, Sarah sat on her front porch and thought about the letters. Dozens of letters written to someone who couldn't receive them, but written anyway out of faith and love and the need to maintain connection across impossible distance. She thought about her own life, her own caution, her own tendency to protect herself from disappointment by not taking risks. Diego had written letters for 8 years to someone he might never find. He had saved money for 3 years to make a journey that might have led nowhere. He had knocked on doors and asked questions and refused to give up even when everyone told him he was chasing an impossible dream. And because of all that faith, all that determination, all that willingness to risk everything for love, he and Elena were together now, planning a future that honored both their past promises and their present reality. Sarah touched the silver bracelet Diego had given her, running her finger over the tiny engraved envelope. Faith, hope, love. The greatest of these is love. The next morning, Sarah woke up with a decision in her heart. She had been thinking for months about leaving Millfield, about taking a job at a larger newspaper in a bigger city. She had been holding back out of fear of failure, fear of loneliness, fear of leaving behind the safe, predictable life she had built in her hometown. But Diego and Elena's story had taught her that some risks were worth taking, that some dreams were worth chasing even when the outcome was uncertain. When she met them for breakfast before their departure, she told them about her decision to apply for a job at a newspaper in Chicago. "That's wonderful," Elena said immediately. "You should absolutely do it." "Are you scared?" Diego asked perceptively. "Terrified," Sarah admitted. "But you taught me that fear isn't a good reason not to try." Diego smiled. "Fear just means something matters enough to be worth the risk." They hugged goodbye in the parking lot of the diner, promising to stay in touch. As Sarah watched their truck disappear down the highway toward Los Angeles, she felt a mix of sadness and excitement. Sadness because she would miss their friendship, but excitement because she was finally ready to write her own story of taking chances and believing in dreams. A month later, Sarah received a letter from Chicago. She had gotten the job at the Tribune. A month after that, she packed her belongings and left Millfield for the first time in her life. But before she left, she made one final stop at the Henderson place. The marigolds Elena had planted were just beginning to sprout, tiny green shoots pushing up through the dark soil along the fence line. Mrs. Johnson came out to say goodbye and promised to send pictures when the marigolds bloomed. "They'll be beautiful," she said confidently. Mrs. Henderson always said marigolds were the most determined flowers. They bloom no matter what, as long as someone has faith in them. As Sarah drove out of Millfield for the last time as a resident, she thought about determination and faith and the power of believing in something even when you couldn't see how it would work out. Somewhere behind her, marigolds were growing. Somewhere ahead of her, a new life was waiting. And somewhere in Los Angeles, two people who had found each other against all odds were reading 8 years' worth of love letters and planning a future built on the foundation of promises kept. Elena Vasquez returned to Millfield on a warm Saturday in May, just 3 weeks after her graduation from UCLA. Sarah had been nervous about the meeting for days, unsure what to expect from the woman whose love story she had helped to continue. Elena stepped off the Greyhound bus at the small station on the edge of town and Sarah recognized her immediately. She looked exactly as Diego had described, older than the 16-year-old girl who had left Millfield, but with the same warm brown eyes and ready smile. Her dark hair was shorter now, cut in a neat bob that framed her face, and she wore a simple blue dress with white flowers printed on it. "Sarah?" Elena asked, approaching with a tentative smile. "Elena." Sarah found herself smiling back automatically. There was something about Elena's presence that put people at ease immediately. "It's so good to meet you again. Officially, I mean." They hugged briefly, and Sarah was surprised by how natural it felt, as if they were old friends rather than virtual strangers. "I can't believe I'm back here," Elena said, looking around the small bus station with wonder. "Everything looks exactly the same." "Millfield doesn't change much," Sarah laughed, "though there are a few new businesses on Main Street." As they walked toward town, Elena asked question after question about the people she had known, the places she remembered. Sarah found herself seeing familiar sights through Elena's eyes: the old movie theater with its faded marquee, the diner where all the high school kids used to hang out, the park where Elena said she used to read under the big oak tree. "I was so angry when we left," Elena confessed as they paused at the park. "I didn't understand why we had to go so suddenly. My parents tried to explain about my father's job, about opportunities in California, but all I could think about was leaving my friends, leaving the only home I had ever known." "What really happened?" Sarah asked gently. "There were rumors at school, but nobody knew for sure." Elena sat down on one of the old swings, testing it carefully before putting her full weight on it. "My father lost his job here. The company he worked for was bought out by a bigger corporation, and they eliminated his position. He had been looking for work for months without telling us kids. When the California job came up, he had to take it immediately or lose the opportunity." She pushed herself gently on the swing, her feet dragging in the dirt. "We left so fast that I didn't get to say goodbye to anyone properly. I wrote letters to all my friends for the first year, but eventually the responses stopped coming. People moved on, made new friends. I felt like I had been erased from Millfield completely. But you never forgot about Diego." Elena stopped swinging and looked at Sarah with surprise. "How did you know that?" "Just the way you wrote about him in your letter. The way you described feeling relief when he showed up at your door, not surprise." Elena was quiet for a moment, dragging her toes in the dirt. "I tried to forget him," she said finally. "For years, I told myself it was silly to hold on to feelings for someone I had known for such a short time when I was so young. But Diego was different from any other boy I had ever met." She looked up at the oak tree, its leaves rustling in the warm afternoon breeze. "He listened to me, really listened. When I told him I wanted to be a teacher, he didn't say it was boring or predictable like other boys did. When I talked about books I loved, he asked questions and remembered the titles. He made me feel like my thoughts and dreams were important." "And you never heard from him after you moved?" "Nothing. I wrote him letters for months, but they all came back marked undeliverable. I didn't know his exact address in Mexico, just the town name. Eventually, I gave up trying." They walked on toward the Henderson place, now freshly painted and surrounded by a well-tended garden. Elena stopped at the fence and stared at the house for a long time. "Mrs. Henderson used to let me help in her garden," Elena said softly. "My mother worked 2 jobs when we first moved to Millfield, and Mrs. Henderson would watch me after school sometimes. She taught me how to plant seeds, how to tell when tomatoes were ripe, how to dry herbs for winter. She sounds like a special person. She was. She never had children of her own, but she mothered half the neighborhood kids. When I was feeling homesick for Mexico, we had moved here from Guadalajara when I was 4. She would tell me stories about her own grandmother, who had immigrated from Ireland. She helped me understand that you could love a new place without forgetting the old one." Elena reached into her purse and pulled out a small paper bag. "I brought something," she said, showing Sarah the contents. "Marigold seeds. Mrs. Henderson always planted marigolds along her front fence. She said they brought good luck and kept the bad bugs away from the vegetables." They spent the next hour planting the seeds along the fence line, talking quietly as they worked. Mrs. Johnson, the new owner, came out to see what they were doing and was delighted to learn about Mrs. Henderson's gardening traditions. She insisted they stay for lemonade and promised to take good care of the marigolds when they sprouted. As the afternoon wore on, Sarah found herself genuinely liking Elena. She was thoughtful and funny, with an easy laugh and a way of making everyone around her feel comfortable. Sarah could understand why Diego had been drawn to her, and why he had been willing to search for 8 years to find her again. "Tell me about Diego now," Sarah said as they walked downtown for dinner. "What's he like after all these years?" Elena's face lit up immediately. "He's wonderful. Still serious sometimes, but he laughs more now than he did when we were young. He's working as a translator for a legal aid clinic in Los Angeles while he studies for his citizenship exam. He wants to help other immigrants navigate the system." "That sounds like meaningful work." "It is. He told me about some of the cases he's worked on: families separated by deportation, people trying to get work permits, students trying to get financial aid for college. He says every person he helps reminds him of his own family's struggles." They ate dinner at the diner where Elena used to order chocolate milkshakes after school. The owner, Mr. Peterson, still remembered her and made a big fuss over her return. Word spread quickly through the small restaurant that Elena Vasquez was back in town, and soon half their high school classmates had stopped by to say hello. Sarah watched Elena handle the attention with grace, asking about people's families and jobs, remembering details about their lives from years earlier. She deflected questions about why she had come back with vague mentions of nostalgia and curiosity about the old hometown. "You didn't tell them about Diego," Sarah observed later as they walked through the town square. "Not yet," Elena said. "I wanted to get through today first. Besides, I'm not sure they would understand. Some of them think it's romantic, but others might think it's crazy or obsessive." "What do you think?" Elena stopped walking and turned to face Sarah. "I think I'm the luckiest person in the world," she said simply. "I think most people never get a second chance at their first love. I think Diego and I are both different people than we were at 15, but we're different in ways that make us more compatible, not less." They sat on a bench in the town square as the sun began to set behind the courthouse. The streetlights were starting to come on, and a few teenagers were hanging out by the old fountain, just like Elena and her friends used to do years earlier. "Sarah, can I ask you something personal?" Elena said. "Of course. When you helped Diego, when you spent all that time looking through old newspapers and writing letters to encourage him, was it just kindness to a stranger? Or was there something else?" Sarah considered the question carefully. "It was kindness at first," she said honestly. "But the more I learned about your story, the more invested I became. I think I was living vicariously through Diego's faith and determination. He was doing something I had never done, taking a huge risk for love, believing in something even when it seemed impossible." "Are you in love with someone?" The question caught Sarah off guard. "No," she said after a moment. "I've dated, but nothing serious. I've always been cautious, I guess. Practical. Maybe too practical." Sarah laughed. "Maybe. Your story definitely made me think about that." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the teenagers flirt and laugh by the fountain. Finally, Elena spoke again. "Diego is driving here tomorrow," she said quietly. Sarah turned to look at her with surprise. "Here? To Millfield?" Elena nodded. "He wanted to see this place for himself, to understand where I came from, to see the Henderson house, to meet you and thank you in person." "Oh my goodness," Sarah said, feeling suddenly nervous. "I had no idea. He's been planning it for weeks. He said he wanted to complete the circle, to see the place where our story really began." "But your story began in Mexico, didn't it? When you first met?" Elena shook her head. "Our story began when I had to leave, and we made promises to find each other again. And then it continued when Diego came here looking for me and met you. In a way, you're part of our story now, Sarah. You're the reason we found each other." Sarah felt tears prick at her eyes. She had never thought of herself as part of their love story, just as someone who had happened to be in the right place at the right time. "There's something else," Elena said, reaching into her purse and pulling out a small wooden box. "Diego asked me to give this to you." Sarah opened the box carefully. Inside was a delicate silver bracelet with a small charm in the shape of an envelope. "He had it made by a jeweler in Los Angeles," Elena explained. "He said you showed him that letters can carry hope across any distance, and he wanted you to have something to remember that." Sarah held the bracelet up to the streetlight, watching the silver catch the glow. "It's beautiful," she whispered. There's an engraving on the envelope, Elena pointed out. Sarah looked more closely and found tiny words etched into the silver. Faith, hope, love, and the greatest of these is love. He chose that, Elena said. He said you taught him that love is always worth the risk, even when the outcome is uncertain. As Sarah fastened the bracelet around her wrist, she realized that Diego and Elena's story had indeed become part of her own story. Their faith in love, their willingness to wait and search and hope, had shown her something about her own heart that she hadn't recognized before. Tomorrow, Diego would arrive in Millfield, and the circle would be complete. The boy who had searched for 8 years would finally see the place where his journey began, and the girl who had helped him would meet the man whose determination had changed her understanding of what love could be. The marigold seeds they had planted that afternoon would take weeks to sprout, but Sarah had a feeling they would bloom beautifully when the time was right. Just like some promises, some dreams, and some love stories that are worth waiting 4.6 months passed before Sarah heard anything about Diego again. Life in Millfield had returned to its predictable rhythm of small-town stories and local gossip. Sarah had thrown herself into her work at the newspaper, writing articles about county fair preparations and school board elections. But she found herself thinking about Diego often, especially when she walked past the Henderson place. The house had been sold to a young family from the next county over. The Johnsons were fixing it up slowly, painting the shutters blue and planting flowers along the front walk. The crooked mailbox had been replaced with a sturdy new one, painted to match the shutters. It was on a rainy Tuesday in September when Sarah received the first letter. She was sorting through the mail at the newspaper office when she noticed the envelope with her name written in careful, familiar handwriting. There was no return address, but the postmark read Fresno, California. Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she opened the envelope. Dear Sarah, I hope this letter finds you well. I wanted to write to thank you again for your kindness when I was in Millfield. Because of the information you found, I was able to locate Elena's family in Fresno. I found them living in a small apartment near the city center. Elena's father works for a large farming company, just as the newspaper said. Her mother cleans houses, and Roberto Jr. works at an auto repair shop. But Elena was not there. Mrs. Vasquez told me that Elena moved to Los Angeles 2 years ago to go to college. She is studying to be a teacher at UCLA. Mrs. Vasquez gave me Elena's address, and I have written to her, but I have not received a response yet. I am working at a restaurant here in Fresno, saving money to go to Los Angeles. Mrs. Vasquez invited me to stay for dinner, and she showed me pictures of Elena. She looks almost the same, just older. Still beautiful, still with that smile that I remember. Mrs. Vasquez told me something that made me both happy and worried. She said Elena never talks about dating anyone, that she seems to be waiting for something. But she also said Elena has become very quiet about the past, that she doesn't like to talk about Millfield or the friends she left behind. I don't know what this means, but I am not giving up. I will go to Los Angeles and find her. Even if she doesn't want to see me, I need to know that she is happy and living the life she dreamed about. Thank you again for everything. You gave me hope when I needed it most. Your friend, Diego. Sarah read the letter twice, then folded it carefully and put it in her desk drawer. She found herself smiling at Diego's determination while feeling worried about what he might find in Los Angeles. 8 years was a long time. People changed. Dreams changed. 3 weeks later, another letter arrived. Dear Sarah, I am in Los Angeles now. This city is bigger than anything I could have imagined. There are more people on one street here than in all of Millfield. I found Elena's address. She lives in a small apartment near the university with 2 other girls. I have been there 3 times, but she is never home. Her roommates told me she works at a tutoring center in the evenings and takes classes during the day. I finally saw her yesterday. I was waiting across the street from her apartment building when she came home from work. She looked tired but happy, carrying a big bag of books and papers. She was wearing jeans and a yellow sweater, and her hair is longer now, but she looked exactly like the girl I fell in love with 8 years ago. I almost called out to her, but something stopped me. What if she doesn't want to see me? What if she has moved on and forgotten our promises? What if I am just a ghost from her past that she would rather not face? I stood there like a coward and watched her go into her building. Then, I walked back to my hotel and wrote her another letter. I have sent her 5 letters now, with no response. Maybe she never got them. Maybe she did get them and chose not to answer. I don't know what to do, Sarah. Part of me wants to knock on her door and tell her everything I came here to say. Part of me thinks I should go back to Mexico and try to forget about a dream that was meant for teenagers, not grown adults. What would you do? Your friend, Diego. Sarah stared at this second letter for a long time. She could feel Diego's uncertainty and pain in every word. She had never been in love the way he seemed to love Elena. But she could imagine how difficult it must be to come so close to someone you had searched for, only to be paralyzed by fear. That evening, Sarah did something she had never done before. She wrote a letter to a stranger. Dear Diego, I received your letters and have been thinking about your situation constantly. I can't tell you what to do. Only you can make that decision. But I can tell you what I think about courage and regret. My grandmother used to say that the only mistakes we truly regret are the chances we didn't take. You have come so far and waited so long. You found Elena's family. You found Elena herself. You have already shown more courage than most people ever will. I think you should talk to her. Not because I'm certain everything will work out the way you hope, but because both of you deserve to know what might have been. Elena deserves to know that someone loved her enough to search for 8 years. You deserve to know whether your feelings are returned or if it's time to let go and build a different future. Whatever happens, you will know you tried everything. You will know you kept your promise. I'm enclosing something that might help. Remember when you asked me to tell Elena about you if she ever came back to Millfield? Well, I wrote down exactly what I would say to her. Maybe it will help you find the right words. Be brave, Diego. You've come too far to stop now. Your friend, Sarah. Sarah sealed the letter and mailed it the next morning. She had no idea if her words would help or if Diego would even receive the letter, but she felt better for having written it. Weeks passed with no response. Sarah began to wonder if Diego had decided to return to Mexico, or if he had found Elena and was too busy being happy or heartbroken to write. Then, on a cold morning in November, a different kind of letter arrived at the newspaper office. Dear Sarah Martinez, you don't know me, but I believe you knew me many years ago. My name is Elena Vasquez, and I lived in Millfield until I was 16 years old. I am writing because a young man named Diego Morales told me that you helped him find information about my family. Diego found me in Los Angeles 2 weeks ago. He showed up at my apartment with flowers and a stack of letters that he had been trying to send me for months. It turns out my roommates had been throwing away mail they thought was junk, including all of Diego's letters. Sarah, I don't know how to thank you for what you did. When Diego told me about meeting you by the Henderson place, about how you spent days helping him search through newspaper files, about how you encouraged him to keep looking for me, I cried for an hour. I need to tell you something that Diego doesn't know yet, something I haven't told anyone in years. I never forgot about him either. For 8 years, I wondered what happened to the boy I met that summer, the boy who promised to find me again. I wondered if he was still in Mexico, if he was happy, if he ever thought about me. But I also convinced myself that teenage promises don't last. I thought I was being practical, realistic, grown-up. I dated other people, but I never felt with anyone else what I felt with Diego during those 2 weeks when we were 15. When he showed up at my door, my first emotion wasn't surprise. It was relief. Relief that I hadn't been wrong to remember him. Relief that somewhere in the world, someone had been thinking about me the way I had been thinking about him. We have spent every day together for the past 2 weeks. We talk about everything, who we've become, what we've learned, how we've changed. But underneath all the catching up, we're still the same people who made promises to each other 8 years ago. I graduate from UCLA in the spring. Diego is going to stay in Los Angeles, and we're going to see what happens. We're not rushing anything, but we're not letting fear keep us apart anymore either. I wanted you to know this because none of it would have happened without your kindness to a stranger. You gave Diego hope when he needed it most, and you gave me back something I thought I had lost forever. I also wanted to ask you something. Diego told me about the Henderson place, about how it looked when he found it. That house holds a lot of memories for me. Mrs. Henderson was like a second grandmother to me when I was growing up. I used to spend hours in her garden, helping her plant flowers and listening to her stories. Would it be possible for me to visit Millfield sometime? I know the house has been sold, but I would like to see the town again, to remember the good things about the place I left behind. And I would very much like to meet the person who helped bring me and Diego back together. With gratitude and affection, Elena Vasquez *. Sarah read Elena's letter 3 times, feeling tears prick at her eyes. She had played such a small part in this story, really, just a few hours of searching through old newspapers and a couple of encouraging letters. But, somehow, those small actions had helped reunite two people who had been looking for each other across time and distance. That afternoon, Sarah walked past the Henderson place, now the Johnson place. The blue shutters gleamed in the autumn sunlight, and there were mums planted in neat rows along the front porch. Mrs. Johnson was raking leaves in the front yard, and she waved when she saw Sarah. "Beautiful day, isn't it?" Mrs. Johnson called out. "Yes," Sarah replied, thinking about letters traveling between California and Illinois, about promises kept and love that endured. It really is. That evening, Sarah sat down to write 2 letters. The first was to Elena, inviting her to visit Millfield and telling her all the things she remembered about the girl who had been kind to everyone and never forgot to share her lunch. The second letter was to Diego, congratulating him on finding Elena and thanking him for reminding her that some things were worth waiting for. As she sealed both envelopes, Sarah realized that Diego and Elena's story had changed her too. She had always been practical, cautious, someone who planned carefully and took calculated risks. But watching Diego's faith and determination had made her think about her own dreams, her own willingness to take chances. Maybe it was time to stop playing it safe. Maybe it was time to remember that the best things in life often required a leap of faith, just like the leap Diego had taken when he decided to look for a girl he had known for 2 weeks 8 years earlier. Outside her window, the streetlights were coming on, casting long shadows across the quiet streets of Millfield. Somewhere in Los Angeles, 2 people were probably talking late into the night, making up for 8 years of separation. And here in small-town Illinois, a young woman was realizing that sometimes the most extraordinary stories begin with the simplest acts of kindness. The mailbox at the Henderson place might have been replaced, but the magic of letters and promises and love that endures was very much alive. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the dusty road when Sarah Martinez first noticed the mailbox hanging crooked on its post. She was 23 then, fresh out of college with dreams bigger than the small town of Millfield could contain. The mailbox belonged to the old Henderson place, a farmhouse that had stood empty for months after Mrs. Henderson passed away. Sarah had taken the job at the local newspaper not because she loved journalism, but because it was the only position available that didn't involve working at the factory or the diner. Every day, she walked the same route from her tiny apartment above the bakery to the newspaper office on Main Street. The walk took her past the Henderson property, where weeds grew tall around the white picket fence, and the mailbox seemed to lean further each day. It was on a Tuesday in March when she first saw him. He was tall, maybe 6 feet, with dark hair that caught the afternoon light. He wore a simple blue work shirt and jeans that had seen better days. What caught her attention wasn't his appearance, though. It was the way he stood perfectly still by the fence, staring at the empty house as if he could will someone to appear in the windows. Sarah slowed her pace, curious about the stranger. She had lived in Millfield her entire life and knew everyone by sight, if not by name. This man was definitely not local. He turned when he heard her footsteps on the gravel. His eyes were brown, she noticed, and they held a sadness that seemed too heavy for someone who looked to be about her age. "Excuse me," he said, his voice carrying a slight accent she couldn't place. "Do you know what happened to the family who lived here?" Sarah stopped walking completely. "Mrs. Henderson? She passed away last fall. Cancer. Her children live in the city now. They're trying to sell the place." The man's shoulders seemed to sag at this news. He looked back at the house, then at the mailbox, then at the ground. "I'm sorry," Sarah said gently. "Were you a friend of hers?" He shook his head slowly. "No, not exactly. I was looking for someone who used to live here. Someone I knew a long time ago." There was something in his voice that made Sarah want to keep talking to him. Maybe it was the loneliness she recognized, or maybe it was simple curiosity. Either way, she found herself saying, "I grew up here. Maybe I knew them too. What was their name?" The man looked at her with hope flickering in his brown eyes. Elena. Elena Vasquez. She would be about your age now, I think. Dark hair, brown eyes, always laughing. He paused. She used to wear a silver bracelet with a small cross. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. Elena Vasquez. She remembered Elena perfectly. They had been in the same grade through elementary school, before Elena's family moved away suddenly, during their sophomore year of high school. Elena had been one of those people everyone liked. Kind, funny, smart without being show-offy about it. I knew Elena, Sarah said softly. But she moved away years ago. Her family left when we were in high school. The man closed his eyes for a moment, as if absorbing a physical blow. Do you know where they went? I'm sorry, I don't. It was sudden. One day she was there, the next day she wasn't. Her dad got a job somewhere else, I think. Maybe California? I'm not sure. They stood in silence for a long moment. A car drove by, kicking up dust that settled on their shoes. In the distance, Sarah could hear the whistle from the factory, signaling the end of the day's shift. My name is Diego, the man said finally. Diego Morales. Sarah Martinez. Diego reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It looked old, yellowed at the edges, and soft from being handled many times. This is the last letter I got from her, he said, unfolding it carefully. She said she was moving, but she would write with her new address as soon as they got settled. That was 8 years ago. Sarah looked at the letter without reading it. The handwriting was definitely Elena's. She remembered those careful, rounded letters from school. You've been looking for her all this time? Sarah asked. Diego nodded. I came to this country 3 years ago. Elena and I met when my family was visiting here, before we moved back to Mexico. We were both 15. We promised to stay in touch, to find each other again when we were older. He folded the letter carefully and put it back in his pocket. I've been working, saving money, learning English. I finally had enough to come back and find her. Sarah felt her heart break a little for this man who had traveled so far and waited so long, only to find an empty house and a crooked mailbox. I'm sorry, she said. I wish I could help you find her. Diego looked at her with something like surprise. You would help me? But you don't even know me. I knew Elena, Sarah said simply. She was a good person. And if someone was looking for me the way you're looking for her, I'd hope a stranger would be kind enough to help. A small smile crossed Diego's face, the first one Sarah had seen from him. It changed his whole appearance, making him look younger and less burdened. Thank you, he said. That means more than you know. Sarah found herself smiling back. Are you staying in town? I got a room at the motel near the highway. I was planning to stay a few days, maybe ask around, see if anyone knew anything. The motel near the highway? Sarah couldn't hide her concern. That place was barely habitable, known more for its broken air conditioning and questionable cleanliness than its hospitality. That's not a great place to stay. Diego shrugged. It's what I can afford. An idea formed in Sarah's mind. It was probably crazy, definitely impulsive, but something about Diego's story touched her deeply. Listen, she said. I work at the newspaper here. We have files going back decades, including school records and local news. If Elena's family was mentioned anywhere, maybe when they moved, or if her dad's job change was announced, it might be in our archives. Diego's eyes widened. You would do that? I can't promise we'll find anything, Sarah warned. But it's worth looking. Yes, Diego said quickly. Yes, please. I would be very grateful. They arranged to meet the next day after Sarah finished work. As they parted ways, Sarah walking toward town and Diego heading back to his battered pickup truck, Sarah found herself thinking about the letter in Diego's pocket. 8 years of waiting, of wondering, of hoping. She couldn't imagine that kind of patience, that kind of faith in a promise made by teenagers. That evening, Sarah sat in her small apartment and thought about Elena Vasquez. She remembered Elena's laugh, bright and infectious. She remembered how Elena always shared her lunch with anyone who forgot theirs, how she helped other students with math homework even though it meant staying late after school. She also remembered the day Elena left. It had been a Friday in October. Elena had seemed normal that morning, maybe a little quiet, but nothing unusual. By Monday, her desk was empty, and the teacher announced that the Vasquez family had moved away from Mr. Vasquez's work. Some of the other students had whispered that the family left because of money troubles. or because Elena's older brother had gotten in some kind of trouble. But Sarah had always wondered if there was more to the story. Elena had never mentioned moving, had never said goodbye. The next day, Sarah arrived at work early and went straight to the archives. The Millfield Gazette wasn't a large paper, but it had been serving the community for over 50 years. Every issue was carefully preserved, first in bound volumes and later on microfilm. She started with October of their sophomore year and worked backward and forward from there. It was tedious work, scanning through birth announcements, wedding notices, school board meetings, and local business news. She found it in the October 15th edition, just a small paragraph in the local news section. The Vasquez family has relocated to Fresno, California, where Roberto Vasquez will assume a position with Central Valley Agricultural Services. The family includes wife Carmen and children Elena, 16, and Roberto Jr., 18. They have been residents of Millfield for 12 years and will be missed by the community. Sarah stared at the notice for a long moment. Fresno, California. It wasn't much, but it was more than Diego had before. When Diego arrived that afternoon, Sarah was waiting with a photocopy of the news item. His hand shook slightly as he read it. Fresno, he said quietly. California. It's not much, Sarah said apologetically. But maybe it's a start. Diego looked up at her, and she was surprised to see tears in his eyes. It's everything, he said. For 3 years, I've had nothing. Now I have somewhere to look. What will you do? Sarah asked. I'll go there, Diego said without hesitation. I'll find a way to get to California and look for them. Sarah felt a strange mix of admiration and worry. That's a big step. California is huge, and Fresno is a big city. They might not even be there anymore. Maybe not, Diego agreed. But I have to try. Over the next 3 days, Diego and Sarah spent every afternoon going through more newspaper archives. They found mention of Elena making the honor roll, of Roberto Jr. graduating, of the family participating in a church fundraiser. Small pieces of a life lived in a small town, but each piece felt precious to Diego. Sarah found herself looking forward to these afternoon searches more than she cared to admit. Diego was easy to talk to, despite the sadness that seemed to follow him like a shadow. He told her about his life in Mexico, about working in his uncle's restaurant, about the English classes he took at night to prepare for his journey north. Why Elena? Sarah asked one afternoon as they sorted through a box of old social pages. I mean, you were both so young when you met. You only knew each other for a few weeks. Diego was quiet for so long that Sarah wondered if she had asked something too personal. Finally, he spoke. Have you ever met someone and felt like you'd been looking for them your whole life without knowing it? He asked. That's what it was like with Elena. We spent every day together during my family's visit. We talked about everything. Books, music, our dreams, our fears. When I had to leave, we both cried. He pulled out Elena's letter again, unfolding it with the same careful attention he always showed it. She wrote that she would wait for me, he said, that we would find each other again. I made her the same promise. Sarah looked at the letter, at the faded ink and careful handwriting. At the bottom, Elena had drawn a small heart next to her signature. You've kept that promise for 8 years, Sarah observed. And I'll keep it for 8 more if I have to, Diego replied. On Friday afternoon, Sarah walked with Diego back to the Henderson place one more time. He wanted to see it again before he left for California. They stood by the fence in comfortable silence, watching the empty house settle into the golden light of late afternoon. Thank you, Diego said finally, for everything, for helping me, for believing this wasn't crazy. I don't think it's crazy, Sarah said honestly. I think it's beautiful. Diego turned to look at her. Will you do something for me? Of course. If Elena ever comes back here, if she ever asks about the Henderson place or looks for someone who might have been looking for her, will you tell her about me? Will you tell her I came here? Sarah nodded. I will. I promise. Diego reached into his truck and pulled out a small notebook. He wrote something quickly and tore out the page. This is my information in California, he said, handing her the paper. In case. Sarah took the paper and folded it carefully. In case. As Diego's truck disappeared down the dusty road, Sarah stood by the fence for a long time. The mailbox still hung crooked on its post, and the house still stood empty. But something had changed. The place felt less lonely somehow, as if Diego's hope had left an echo in the air. That evening, Sarah walked home by a different route. She wasn't ready to pass the Henderson place again just yet. The story felt unfinished, like a book with missing pages. She didn't know then that Diego's story was about to become her story too. She didn't know that Elena Vasquez would indeed return to Millfield, or that when she did, the letters in her suitcase would change everything Sarah thought she knew about love, patience, and the power of promises kept. All Sarah knew that evening was that somewhere on the road to California, a man named Diego Morales was carrying 8 years of hope toward an uncertain future. And somehow, she was carrying a piece of that hope too.